Welcome back. This video will be a step-by-step development guide for our fellow developers who want to play with Agent Zero, make it their own, or contribute to the framework. I will explain how to set up a local development environment in VS Code or any other compatible IDE so that you can run Agent Zero locally, develop it locally, and use proper debugging tools. I will also explain the extensibility framework inside Agent Zero so that you know how you can get the most out of these extensibility features. And this is the goal of today's video. Agent Zero is running on my host machine inside my VS Code. When I send it a message, I can stop the execution on a breakpoint, and I can debug my code step by step, seeing all variables. As always, Agent Zero is completely free and open source. It is being built for you. You can use it for whatever you want. You can change it however you want. Visit our web, agent-zero.ai. You can find links to our socials here. You can learn more about the project, its goals, and you can also visit our community platform, especially if you're our token holder. You can see improvement proposals being upvoted and you can participate. This tutorial will also be posted in the classroom of our Skool community. See skool.com/agentzero if you want to see more tutorials and be part of our community. So in our GitHub README, you can now find two new sections, development and extensibility. I will start with the development guide. It is a step-by-step tutorial I will go through in this video that will show you how to set up your VS Code compatible IDE, Python environment, how we use a hybrid approach using Docker in combination with the local environment, and how to get everything up and running. This video assumes you have some understanding of the tools we are going to use, so I'm not going to be showing how to install VS Code, how to install Python, how to install Docker. I will show you how to connect these together. First, let me explain. Agent Zero runs in a Docker container by default, meaning if you download and run Agent Zero as a user, it will be a Docker image turned into a Docker container, and the agent lives inside the Docker container. This simplifies the installation and ensures unified environment, meaning you don't have to do any additional install steps. You don't need to prepare the environment. The Linux, the Python environment, the whole Agent Zero framework and all its dependencies and additional software, including AI models, are pre-built into the Docker container. So as a user, you don't need to do anything. You just download and deploy the Docker image. However, developing and especially debugging something in a running container would be very complicated. So we use a hybrid approach instead. We run the Agent Zero framework locally inside our IDE. We can debug it there. And when the local instance needs to use the code execution tool or the built-in search engine or something that is pre-installed in the Docker container, it makes a remote function call to a running Docker container and executes this single call there. This way, most of the framework runs locally. We can debug everything. We can debug our tools. We can debug how the memory works, how the agent's conversation loop works. And only when a code needs to be executed, it makes a call to a Dockerized instance to execute it in the Kali Linux there. It may sound complicated at first, but the setup is very easy and it just works. So what are you going to need to follow this guide? You will need a VS Code compatible IDE like VS Code, Cursor, Windsurf, the choice is yours. You will need some sort of Python environment like basic Python, Conda, UV. Again, the choice is yours. And you're going to need a Docker. I will be using Docker Desktop, Conda, and clean VS Code for this tutorial. Optionally, you can use Git or you can download everything from Git manually. The first step, install required software. You will need, like I said, Python, Docker, and VS Code. Here I have a clean VS Code, no extensions installed, it's a fresh new profile. I have Docker Desktop running here, and I have Conda installed for Python on my Mac. Now the actual step one is to clone or download the repository. If you have Git installed, you can do git clone, or you can go to our repository in a browser and download the files. So here in a terminal, I'm going to cd to my desktop, and I'm going to run the git clone Agent Zero repository. This will create Agent Zero folder on my desktop and download all the files. Now that I have the project downloaded, I can open it in my IDE using File, Open Folder, or clicking Open Folder here and selecting the folder from my desktop. The first time you might be prompted to trust the directory, so you have to confirm that. And now it's time to prepare the IDE for the project. You can notice on the screenshot in the documentation, as well as here, that it automatically asks me to install the recommended extensions. That is because the Agent Zero project is pre-packed with VS Code configuration and recommended extensions like Python, Python debugger, and errorlens. So I can install all these extensions with one click. And now I have VS Code ready for Python projects. I can already open one of the Python files and it should show me proper syntax highlighting. And it should immediately show me some errors because we did not yet set up our Python environment and install dependencies. So currently Flask is not installed. Now we prepare the Python environment. This assumes that some Python runtime is already installed. I can click the Python version in the lower right corner and it should show me a list of available environments. This is the button with Python version. And I can create a new virtual environment for this project here. I have both basic Python venv and Conda installed, so it asks me to choose what environment I want to create. I will select Conda here, and it should ask me for a Python version. I will select 3.12. That is guaranteed to work with Agent Zero. Now my environment is being created. It should take just a few seconds, and a Conda folder should be created in my project. Everything I show you here is described in the manual, so feel free to stick to it. Now that we have the environment installed, we should verify it in terminal. So now our environment is selected in VS Code. It also has to be selected in the terminal. When I click Terminal, New Terminal, I can see my Conda environment in this folder gets activated automatically. If not, you might need to create a new terminal here. For some reason, sometimes the first time it doesn't get automatically activated in the terminal. If you see the path to your environment at the beginning of the shell prompt, you're good to go. All right, we're getting really close. Now we just need to install the requirements by running these two commands, pip install requirements and playwright install Chromium for the web browser. You can run these in the terminal in your VS Code. Requirements will take a while. And also install the playwright Chromium. Mine was already downloaded, so the installation did nothing here. Congratulations if you've got this far. You can now run Agent Zero locally. Now, when the environment is prepared, dependencies installed, we can go to the Run and Debug tab, and the project is also pre-configured here in VS Code launch settings for the debugger, so you can select to run the entry point, which is runui.py, or run the current file. So let's start by pressing play here on the runui.py. And I can see the framework is starting in the terminal here. First time, it will take a while. And I can see my Agent Zero server has started on the port 5000. Don't worry about this RFC error. We did not yet connect this local instance to the Dockerized instance, so this error is fine now. And I can click this link to open Agent Zero in a web UI. Now, this is something that happens to me only on this machine and only on port 5000. I don't know why the port should be open. I wanted to show you in case the same happens to you. What I need to do here is just change the port Agent Zero is being served on. I have two options. I can edit the debugger launch file, and I can add a port argument here, like 5555, and save it, stop the debugger, and run it again. This time it will start on port 5555, which works perfectly fine on my machine. The other option is to edit the .env file in the project and add a web UI port variable there. Both of these methods are described in the documentation. Okay, I can now put my OpenRouter API key here and say hi to our agent. And the agent works perfectly fine. As described in the guide, most of the framework works at this point, but some parts like the code execution tool or the search engine, which require the Docker instance, will not work yet. The most powerful aspect of this local setup is the debugger. The debugger allows me to stop the code execution at any time and inspect all the runtime variables and move through the code step by step and even jump from one location to another. Let's see when we open the Python API message. We can put a breakpoint in any Python file by clicking on the left of the line number. So this process method of the message API handler gets called whenever you send a message to your agent from the front end. So I can put a breakpoint here. I can see the red mark here. And now when I send another message to agent 0, like tell me a joke, it will automatically switch me to VS Code. The execution of the framework is now paused. The code stops at this line, and I can see all the variables in the file. I can see their contents by pointing my cursor over them. I can even change their values. I can decide whether I want to step inside a function or step over the function. And I can even jump around the code with my right click. So this way you can inspect all the runtime variables, whatever you need to debug. If there's a glitch in your code you don't know how to deal with, debugger is a very powerful tool. And you don't need any more print statements this way. Now when I let it continue, I get the response in UI. Now the only problem is that, like I said, my breakpoint, some parts of the framework will not work, like the code execution tool. For the code execution tool to work, it must be executed in a prepared environment in Linux with Python and its virtual environment prepared with Node.js prepared, etc. So for this, we use the RFC. And the setup is actually very simple. The only thing we need is another instance of Agent Zero running inside Docker. So I'm going to open my Docker desktop here. I'm going to pick the latest testing branch, for example. I'm going to name it AO Development RFC. And I am going to map these two ports, the 22 and 80. Everything is described in the documentation, including my example. I'm going to set the port 22 to 8822 and the 80 to 8880. What I can also do is map the AO folder inside the container to my project folder on my host machine. This way the container will reuse my files from the project folder that I use in VS Code. So whenever I make a change here, it will be automatically reflected in the Docker container. You would probably need to restart the Docker container when you make changes to Python files, but since we do not make many changes that need to be reflected in the Docker container, we are running the framework on our host machine after all. This is not really an issue. Okay, let's run the container. And I can open the web UI of this Dockerized instance. I have my theme set to light inside Docker and dark inside VS Code so that you can see which version is which. And here you may have noticed that it automatically loaded my previous chats, and it also loaded my settings, including the open our API key. That is because I have mapped my project folder into the AO folder of the container, so they share the same configuration files now. It's not necessary, it may come in handy, the choice is yours. So now that we have two instances running, one in VS Code, one in the Docker, the setup is very easy. In Settings, Developer, in the Docker instance, I just need to set an RFC password here. This password will encrypt the communication between the VS Code instance and the Docker instance. So I'm going to set it to something very secure, like 1, 2, 3, 4. You do better. Here I just save. And in my VS Code instance, I will go to Settings, Developer. There are a few more fields here, but there's the RFC password. You need to set this to the same. And you can change the other parameters like the RFC destination URL. In my case, both of these are localhost because the Docker instance is exposed to my localhost, as well as the VS Code instance. I will just need to change the ports because I set them to 8880 and 8822. And that's it. And now I can try again, like get OS version. This should confirm that the code was executed in the Kali Linux. And that should be the end of our configuration. Now Agent Zero fully works. It can use all of its tools. Some of them will be forwarded to the Dockerized instance. Most of them will be executed locally on your machine and you can debug them. When you're finished upgrading your Agent Zero fork, you can build it into a local Docker image with Docker build using Dockerfile local. You can execute this command from the root of the project. You can do it in the VS Code. And this will take your local files from your project and package them into a Docker image you can then deploy wherever you want. So congratulations, and now let's take a look at some of the extensibility options. You can find them in the GitHub README documentation extensibility. And here you can find descriptions of all extensible components inside Agent Zero. We keep the Agent Zero codebase highly modular, so all the tools, API endpoints, and extensions are individual files that are loaded at runtime. We do not put any sophisticated logic into the agent.py file. Everything is done through extensions, helpers, and API endpoints. I will start with APIs. Any Python file placed into the API folder will automatically become a JSON API endpoint. Like the health check here, that should be a very simple one. You just need to have an instance of a class that inherits from API handler superclass. Then you can redefine some of the core methods, like whether your API endpoint requires authentication, requires CSRF token, at which methods is the endpoint available, and then there's the process method that handles the input and produces an output. This way, if you need your external application to communicate with Agent Zero in a different way that was originally designed, just create a new endpoint, copy one of the existing, modify it, put it in the API folder, and you're good to go. Similar are tools. These are tools that can be used by the agent. Every tool in the tools folder needs to inherit the tool superclass, and there is an execute function that takes arguments and produces a response. This is the response tool, for example. This is a tool that the agent uses to generate the green response bubble for you as the user or its superior agent. You can also redefine the before execution and after execution method if you want to change the way it is being logged or stored into the agent's memory. When you create a new tool, you also need to let the agent know about it. So you should create a file in the prompts folder that starts with the name agent.system.tool and name of the tool.markdown. This is how all the tool instructions are named, and these get automatically included into the system prompt. If you need a more dynamic prompt file, you can create a Python file with exactly the same name as the Markdown file. It will automatically be executed when the Markdown file is loaded. And here you can prepare variables for the prompt file, which you can then use as placeholders. Again, it is described in the documentation. Helpers are all the scripts that are not being invoked automatically by the framework. These are being used on demand by other scripts, and they contain helper functions for text manipulation, memory manipulation, file manipulation, and everything the framework needs. These should also be highly modular, and most of the framework logic should be broken down into individual helpers so that they are reusable and we don't have too much clutter in the parent script. And then we have extension hooks. These get invoked at various places throughout the lifecycle of the agent, mostly in the message loop. Current places of these extension points are described in the documentation. I can show you an example in the agent.py file. For example, here, where the message loop starts inside agent.py, we call extensions from the folder message loop start. Here we pass context data into these extensions, and every file in this folder message loop start, currently there's just one here, gets executed if it inherits from the extension superclass. Again, there is an execute method, and here the extension can manipulate the loop context data. A better example might be an extension point like message loop prompts after. This is executed after the system prompt is built, and here we do recall memories, for example. So it is a class extending the extension superclass, and in execute we do a search for memories and inject them into the system prompt. This way we can easily plug extensions in and out. We don't need to modify a huge agent.py file every time we need to add new functionality or whenever we want to discontinue something old. And whenever we are building something brand new that we don't have an extension point for yet, we just create a new one. So this should be the best practice for you as well. If you need to add something into Agent Zero, you can probably use existing extension points or create a new one. It should be as simple as this. One more thing to mention about extensions is that we also have extensions on the agent level. I switched to another editor for this one because this is currently in the testing branch. It will be released to main branch by the end of this week, probably. Now we have a new way of managing subordinate agents. We have agents folder, which contains agent profiles, and each of these agents can have their own tools, prompts, and even extensions. So now you can have extensions that only get triggered when a specialized subordinate agent is executed. For example, the developer agent can now have its context window injected with some project metadata. The researcher agent can keep track of its plan inside the context window using extensions automatically. And these would not affect other agents. It is described in the documentation. When you create an extension with exactly the same name as existing extension in the default folder inside Python extensions, it will overwrite that extension and only the one in the agents folder will get executed. If you create an extension with a brand new name like this one, example extension, all of these extensions in the folder plus extensions in the default folder will get executed in that extension point. I hope it makes sense. It is probably better explained in the documentation, so feel free to stick to this one instead. I hope I didn't miss anything important, and I really hope this video helps you get up to speed with Agent Zero. I hope it makes your workflow a lot easier. As always, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being part of our community, and see you next time.